The Merry Wives of Windsor is a comedy by William Shakespeare, first published in 1602. Though believed to have been written prior to 1597, the Windsor of the play's title is a reference to Windsor Castle in Berkshire, England, and though nominally set in the reign of Henry IV, the play makes no pretense to exist outside contemporary Elizabethan-era English middle-class life. It features the character Sir John Falstaff, the fat knight who had previously been featured in Henry IV Parts 1 and 2. It has been adapted for the opera on several occasions. Characters. Synopsis. The play is nominally set in the early 15th century, during the same period as the Henry IV plays featuring Falstaff, but there is only one brief reference to this period, a line in which the character Fenton is said to have been one of Prince Hale's rowdy friends. He kept company with the wild prince and coins. In all other respects, the play implies a contemporary setting of the Elizabethan era, c. 1600. Falstaff arrives in Windsor very short on money. He decides, to obtain financial advantage, that he will court two wealthy married women, Mistress Ford and Mistress Page. Falstaff decides to send the women identical love letters and asks his servants, pistol and nym, to deliver them to the wives. When they refuse, Falstaff sacks them, and, in revenge, the men tell Ford and Page, the husbands, of Falstaff's intentions. Page is not concerned, but the jealous Ford persuades the host of the Garter Inn to introduce him to Falstaff as a Master Brooke, so that he can find out Falstaff's plans. Meanwhile, three different men are trying to win the hand of Page's daughter, Anne Page. Mistress Page would like her daughter to marry Dr. Keyes, a French physician, whereas the girl's father would like her to marry Master Slender. Anne herself is in love with Master Fenton, but Page had previously rejected Fenton as a suitor due to his having squandered his considerable fortune on high-class living. Hugh Evans, a Welsh parson, tries to enlist the help of Mistress Quickly, servant to Dr. Keyes, in wooing Anne for Slender. But the doctor discovers this and challenges Evans to a duel. The host of the Garter Inn prevents this duel by telling both men a different meeting place, causing much amusement for himself, Justice Shellow, Page and others. Evans and Keyes decide to work together to be revenged on the host. When the women receive the letters, each goes to tell the other, and they quickly find that the letters are almost identical. The Merry Wives are not interested in the aging, overweight Falstaff as a suitor. However, for the sake of their own amusement and to gain revenge for his indecent assumptions towards them, they pretend to respond to his advances. This all results in great embarrassment for Falstaff. Mr. Ford poses as Mr. Brooke, and says he is in love with Mistress Ford but cannot woo her as she is too virtuous. He offers to pay Falstaff to court her, saying that once she has lost her honor he will be able to tempt her himself. Falstaff cannot believe his luck, and tells Brooke he has already arranged to meet Mistress Ford while her husband is out. Falstaff leaves to keep his appointment, and Ford soliloquizes that he is right to suspect his wife, and that the trusting Page is a fool. When Falstaff arrives to meet Mistress Ford, the Merry Wives trick him into hiding in a laundry basket, full of filthy, smelly clothes awaiting laundering. When the jealous Ford returns to try and catch his wife with the knight, the wives have the basket taken away and the contents, including Falstaff, dumped into the river. Although this affects Falstaff's pride, his ego is surprisingly resilient. He is convinced that the wives are just playing hard to get with him, so he continues his pursuit of sexual advancement, with its attendant capital and opportunities for blackmail. Again Falstaff goes to meet the women, but Mistress Page comes back and warns Mistress Ford of her husband's approach again. They try to think of ways to hide him other than the laundry basket, which he refuses to get into. Again, they trick him again. this time into disguising himself as Mistress Ford's maid's obeisant, known as the Fat Woman of Brentford. Ford tries once again to catch his wife with the knight but ends up beating the old woman, whom he despises, and throwing her out of his house. Black and blue. Falstaff laments his bad luck. Eventually the wives tell their husbands about the series of jokes they have played on Falstaff, and together they devise one last trick which ends up with the knight being humiliated in front of the whole town. They tell Falstaff to dress as Herne, the hunter, and meet them by an old oak tree in Windsor Forest, now part of Windsor Great Park. They then dress several of the local children, including Anne and William Page, as fairies and get them to pinch and burn Falstaff to punish him. Page plots to dress Anne in white and tells Slender to steal her away and marry her during the revels. Mistress Page and Dr. Keyes arrange to do the same, but they arrange Anne shall be dressed in green. Anne tells Fenton this, and he and the host arrange for Anne and Fenton to be married instead. The wives meet Falstaff, and almost immediately the fairies attack. Slender, Keyes, and Fenton steal away their brides-to-be during the chaos, and the rest of the characters reveal their true identities to Falstaff. Although he is embarrassed, Falstaff takes the joke surprisingly well, as he sees it was what he deserved. Ford says he must pay back the £20 Brooke gave him and takes the knight's horses as recompense. Slender suddenly appears and says he has been deceived. The Earl he took away to marry was not Anne but a young boy. Keyes arrives with similar news. However, he has actually married his boy. Fenton and Anne arrive and admit that they love each other and have been married. Fenton chides the parents for trying to force Anne to marry men she did not love, and the parents accept the marriage and congratulate the young pair. Eventually they all leave together and Mistress Page even invites Falstaff to come with them. Let us everyone go home and laugh this sport, or by a country fire. Sir John and all. Date and text. The play's date of composition is unknown. It was registered for publication in 1602, but was probably several years old by that date. In the fairy pageant in Act 5 Scene 5, lines 54 to 75, Mistress Quickly, as the Queen of the Fairies, gives a long speech giving an elaborate description of the Order of the Garter. The play also alludes to a German duke, who is generally thought to be Frederick I, Duke of Württemberg, who had visited England in 1592 and was elected to the Order of the Garter in 1597, but was eventually only installed in Stuttgart on the 6th of November 1603. If this is so, it was probably performed when Elizabeth I attended Garter Feast on the 23rd of April. The Garter theory is only speculation, but it is consistent with a story first recorded by John Dennis in 1702 and Nicholas Rowe in 1709, that Shakespeare was commanded to write the play by Queen Elizabeth, who wanted to see Falstaff in love. This theatrical tradition was first recorded by Dennis in the prologue to his adaptation of the play, The Comical Gallant. He states that Queen Elizabeth commanded it to be finished in 14 days. Quote, "Support for the Garter theory is divided. If it is correct, it would probably mean that Shakespeare wrote the Merry Wives of Windsor between Henry IV Part 1 and Part 2. Critics have trouble believing this for several reasons. One is that Pistol and Shallow are introduced as new characters in Henry IV Part 2, but in the Merry Wives their connection to Falstaff is taken for granted. Also, there are no references to any of the major events from Falstaff's 15th century exploits from the history plays, such as the Rebellion, Henry IV Part 1 and 2. In Merry Wives, T.W. critic suggests that Shakespeare was forced to interrupt work on Henry IV Part 2, having written most of it, because the Merry Wives had to be completed quickly. At least parts of the play may have been written around or before the first performances of Part 1. In 1597, after which controversy over the original naming of Falstaff. He was originally the historic Sir John Oldcastle, which presumably did not please Oldcastle's descendants, forced Shakespeare to rename the character. It appears that the joke in v. 85/90 is that Oldcastle, Falstaff incriminates himself by calling out the first letter of his name, O, when his fingertips are singed with candles, which of course works for Oldcastle, but not Falstaff. There is also the castle reference in IV. v. 6. The 18th of January 1602 was the date the play was entered into the register of the Stationers' Company. The first quarto was published later that year, in an inferior text, by bookseller Arthur Johnson. It was published in a second quarto in 1619, as part of William Jaggard's False Folio. The superior first folio text followed in 1623. The title page of Q1 states that the play was acted by the Lord Chamberlain's men, both before Her Majesty, and elsewhere. The earliest definitely dated performance occurred on the 4th of November 1604, at Whitehall Palace. The play is also known to have been performed on the 15th of November 1638, at the Cockpit and Court. Analysis and criticism. A 1902 illustration done for Herbert Beerbohm Tree's Coronation Revival, featuring Ellen Terry as Mistress Page, Margaret Kendall as Mistress Ford, and Tree himself as Falstaff. Most critics consider Merry Wives to be one of Shakespeare's weakest plays, and the Falstaff of Merry Wives to be much inferior to the Falstaff of the two Henry IV plays. That Shakespeare would so stumble with one of his greatest creations is puzzling, and a satisfactory reason for this remains to be found. The most obvious explanation is that it was written very quickly. Leslie Hodson wrote that, "It is certain that the play bears the earmarks of hasty writing." Quote, Themes. Key themes of Merry Wives include love and marriage, jealousy and revenge, social class and wealth, explored with irony, sexual innuendo, sarcasm, and stereotypical views of classes and nationalities. These themes help to give the play something closer to a modern-day view than is often found in Shakespeare's plays. The play is centered on the class prejudices of middle-class England. The lower class is represented by characters such as Bardolph, Nym, and Pistol, Falstaff's followers, and the upper class is represented by Sir John Falstaff and Master Fenton. Shakespeare uses both Latin and misused English to represent the attitudes and differences of the people of this era. For example, much humor is derived from the exaggerated accents of Dr. Keyes and Sir Hugh Evans. For example, Keyes speaks in an exaggerated French dialect. When he finds out he has married a page instead of mistress, and he exclaims that he has married un garçon, and Evans speaks in a thick Welsh accent to the point that Falstaff complains that he makes fritters of English. Much of the comedic effect of the play is derived from misunderstandings between characters. Other scholars say that the treatment of sexual jealousy in the play differs from its treatment in others, like Othello in A Winter's Tale. The jealousy of Leontes and Othello is dangerous and deep-seated, while Ford's jealousy is something to be mocked and laughed at. Performance history. Merry Wives was one of the first Shakespearean plays to be performed once the theatres reopened in 1660 after the interregnum. Samuel Pepys saw the King's Company acted on the 6th of December, 1660, and again in 1661 and 1667, though he didn't like it on any occasion. In 1702 John Dennis offered an adaptation. It has been called perversion of the play, titled The Comical Gallant, or The Amours of Sir John Falstaff, which flopped. In 1824, Frederick Reynolds included Merry Wives in his series of operatic adaptations, with music by Henry Bishop. Charles Keene returned to Shakespeare's text in an 1851 production. During the period of anti-German feelings in England during World War I, many German names and titles were changed and given more English-sounding names, including the royal families from Saxe-Coburg-Gotha to Windsor. Kaiser Wilhelm II countered this by jokingly saying that he was off to see a performance of the Merry Wives of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. Single quote.